Okay, it looks like we're live. Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to ask everybody to mute themselves. If you need help doing that, just let me know. Hold on, I always forget to turn my phone off so it doesn't ring in the middle of this. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm going to put us like this. Okay, so my name is Lori and I am the host of our weekly events called Virtual Video Screening and Discussion. And we've been doing this as a way to just get together and talk about the problems that Boise is facing with all these pressures of growth and development and what potential solutions would be. And tonight we're going to talk about alternative housing solutions. So what's going to happen is I'm going to do an introduction to this topic. Then we're going to go switch to a 12-minute film. And then when we come back, I'll introduce our guests and they'll present, and then we'll have a discussion and Q&A at that point. So to start, I'll just read my introduction. With the average rent price in Ada County at $1,595 a month, you would need to make $63,800 a year to be able to afford rent without being cost burdened. Buying a traditional house is also increasingly out of the question for many as well, with the average purchase price of a house in Boise now at a record high of $450,000. You would need an income of $90,000 just to qualify. Americans love the idea of living on their own home on their own little piece of land, but the reality is many low-income or even middle-income Idahoans can't save enough money to buy or build their own home. The concerns about housing, what's available and at what cost, have been decades in the making. Our housing woes have aggressively worsened year over year, with traditional house ownership becoming out of reach for all but the privileged few. The rapidly escalating cost of land and housing is a problem for us all, although the direct impact is shared unevenly among ethnic and generational lines. We must acknowledge that the primary system of landlords, for-profit private development, the market, banks, speculative global capital, and the government have failed us miserably. The system needs long-term structural changes that democratize and decommodify housing, which requires a radical restructuring of relations between people, land, access to money, and shelter. While we wait for that to take place, more people are embracing outside-the-box solutions. We need housing representing all points on the housing spectrum, not just Wall Street investor-owned apartments on one end and increasingly out-of-reach single-family homes on the other. People are looking beyond traditional boundaries to find housing that works, like smaller footprint and collective ownership housing models. Alternative housing is a category of structures that are built or designed outside of what the mainstream real estate industry provides. It is the category for homes that don't fit into the freestanding single-family housing structures we're all so used to, and instead are more unconventional living options. There are several reasons people seek out the experience of living in unique homes. A love of and concern for the environment may compel them to search for housing options that reduce their carbon footprint or bring them closer to nature. Social butterflies may have a desire to live life with a community of like-minded people sharing their lives and talents for the greater good. Travelers and thrill seekers may want to move their homes around the country or make the space they live in an adventure. Others may be looking to live more financially responsible lives and reduce household costs along with other costs of living. Whatever your reason for exploring alternative living, this discussion is meant to be a source of inspiration. We are lucky to be joined by two terrific guests tonight with vast knowledge about innovative housing solutions. Macy Miller is joining us from Moscow, and Eric Kingston is here in Boise. And I will more formally introduce both of them after we watch this short video. So now I'm going to share my screen and we'll watch this video. And just to preface it for folks who may not know, it seems like when I try to find more non-mainstream issues, we have to go outside the United States to find them. That was the case with financialization of housing, and that's the case tonight when we're talking about alternative housing. So this is a video that's produced in Australia. A lot of the content is the same for the United States. Just substitute the word United States, and it will be basically the same. So here goes. Oh shoot, I think I forgot to do something. Hold on.
I don't know about you, but housing seems pretty expensive to me right now. Sure, there are ups and downs, but since the early 80s, house prices have gone up more sharply than wages. And that means if you're struggling to pay rent, or maybe you're battling to get into the housing market, you're not alone. But it's not all doom and gloom. Some people are coming up with some pretty creative ways of getting into the market, building cheaply, splitting costs with other people. So we're going to have a look at how they did it. Andrew Kerr is an architect. He's worked as a tour guide and he loves to travel. And a few years ago, he decided he'd like to build a house without giving up his travelling lifestyle.
I didn't need or didn't want a large house. Just wanted something that was well designed, efficient.
The aim was to build the house for less than $70,000. Yep, you heard me, $70,000. So how do you do that? Well, Andrew hired a local builder, but he did a lot of the unskilled work on site himself. And he also cut costs by using local timber from the site, using recycled bricks and getting seconds and offcuts for the roof. He roped in some family help with painting, and most importantly, he was building a small house.
I mean, every square metre costs money, so if you can save building space that you don't need, that it saves money as well.
Andrew made some design decisions that pushed up the building cost. In the end, Andrew spent $103,000 on the build and $30,000 on services. Add in the $75,000 he spent on the land a few years earlier, and the total cost of the home was less than $210,000.
But I think something like this similar size or similar design would be appropriate for many singles or couples, and likewise could be used as an ancillary unit or a granny flat.
Michael Fotheringham is kind of an expert when it comes to affordable housing. He reckons there are a few factors making housing less affordable than 30 years ago, including wages not keeping up with property prices, more housing being bought up by mum and dad investors, and other cost of living increases such as energy and transport.
Governments are doing what they can at federal and state level and increasingly at local government level, but at the same time we're seeing really creative approaches from individuals responding to a challenging system.
It turns out there are a few people building houses on the cheap. After her relationship ended, Emma Honan realised she was going to have to rent out her house to cover the mortgage. So she set herself what seems like a kind of impossible task: build a second home on her property for herself and her 2 children for $100,000 in just 12 weeks.
So I drew up the house plans and then had them drafted up for the builder.
Emma kept her costs low by doing her own simple design and project management, doing a lot of unskilled labour herself, enlisting some help from friends, and using mostly second-hand materials.
There was a house that was being demolished just in the next suburb, and there was an ad in the paper saying that all the materials from that house were available for $3,000.
That was a bargain price for $15,000 worth of floorboards, weatherboards and windows.
So they just got delivered here, and then we just spent weeks and weeks preparing them, denailing them, stripping the paint off, getting them ready for the carpenters and to use.
So, what was the total cost? $100,000, including fees and approvals. And the total time? 12 weeks. And Emma thinks anyone can do it, as long as the design is simple and a lot of the materials are recycled.
I mean, I made a few mistakes that I would do differently, but not many. Overall, I'm really happy. It's a great space.
But what if you can't afford to buy or can't afford to build by yourself? Well, not everyone's going it alone. Sisters Lynn Sugden and Julie Newby have joined forces to find a nice place they can retire to without the big bill.
We bought a block, which had 2 old cottages on it, and that's how it all started.
The sisters are cutting costs by building a duplex, expanding on the existing cottages. It's saving the sisters money because it's a single dwelling, and Julie and Lynn are sharing rates, sharing bins, sharing bills, and getting Julie's son to build the homes.
If we're having an argument about who's going to plant what plant in our garden out the back, we have our own separate parts to go to, so
we don't argue that much.
We get on pretty well.
Whoever out there wants to do this, I think that they should just get together, work it out, and just go for it.
Sometimes it's the cost of land that is the biggest hurdle to affordable housing. So what if you could buy the house and not have to pay for the expensive land underneath? St Clement's in Mile End is London's first community land trust site, helping 23 local families stay in a part of town that's getting more and more expensive. Naya Yakumaki and her partner moved to East London when it wasn't so trendy. But 17 years down the track, they needed a bigger home, and they found they'd been priced out.
So we were stuck, completely stuck in a small 2-bedroom, growing family. The needs were not met, and we couldn't move. It was impossible for us to move.
Naya came across a community land trust being proposed in their area, St Clement's. Community land trusts, or CLTs, have been pretty successful in the US. People buy the house rather than the land. That's owned by a cooperative or not-for-profit, which is usually lobbied a council or another authority for it.
So the CLT home, as a principle, is built on free land. This immediately removes a huge amount of the cost to a buyer because you don't pay for the land.
The St Clement's home prices are tied to the area's average income, which makes them about a third of the local market value. CLT homes are about creating affordable living, not investment opportunities, because when owners decide to sell, they need to apply the same pricing formula.
We very much know, and we have accepted, and we have endorsed that when we sell our CLT home, we won't make any money.
So could community land trusts work in Australia? Well, technically yes, and there's been some pretty extensive research done. Dr. Louise Crabtree has helped write the manual, literally.
Looking at some of the legal considerations and how organisations that are here can go about setting up community land trusts and articulating that relationship between the organisation and the resident.
It's tricky in Australia to separate land and buildings, and there are no community land trust housing projects here yet. But Louise Crabtree thinks that will soon change, with similar models focused on permanent affordability.
We are seeing an uptick in interest here in Australia, I think because of those challenges that I mentioned before around the ongoing problems with housing costs and people's concerns with building quality.
Not everyone wants to own a home, but even the cost of renting has gone up over the past couple of decades. But there are some innovative solutions being tried by people who are willing to think outside the box. Murrindaka Co-housing is a housing cooperative. Kate Grant has lived there for about 8 years, for both social and financial reasons.
I'd been quite low income, and it was a way of getting out of the private rental market with all the uncertainties and insecurities of that.
Co-ops are popular in North America as an alternative to private rentals. The tenants are members or shareholders in the organisation that owns the property.
And we are the treasurers and the landlords as well as the tenants here. So all the members are responsible for running the whole co-op, collecting the rent.
For Kate and the other tenants, the co-op model means their rent is based on income. Tenants are on a 99-year lease, and anyone who gets behind in their rent can work out a payment plan.
What it means in simple terms is when your income goes up, so does your rent. When your income goes down, so does your rent. There's a minimum and a maximum so that people know what they're in for.
Murrindaka tenants have their own units, but they're expected to share their time, prepping shared meals and doing maintenance. Rachel Lowe enjoys the lack of financial stress, as well as the sense of community. But co-ops aren't for everyone.
It takes people who have patience, but a sense of humour, and beyond a sense of humour, compassion.
In the US, some young people aren't paying any rent. Almost 10 years ago, a student housing shortage in Cleveland prompted a novel idea. Judson Retirement Community opened its doors to college students. Nina Keegan is one of 3 music students living there for free in exchange for performing recitals a few times a year. For Nina, the benefits are clear. She's getting free rent, a huge space to herself, and plenty of room to practice.
So in my old place, I was living with 2 other musicians, and we got quite a few complaints that year. We got a lot of angry letters about our practicing being too loud.
Nina thinks it's a win-win, with residents getting to enjoy music and friendship with the younger generation.
It is a big commitment on both sides, but I think it's totally worth it. I can't imagine living anywhere else after this.
So when it comes to affordable housing, yes, governments and industry make a lot of the big decisions. But as you can see, at least some creative individuals are successfully cutting costs. I mean, their ideas might not be for everyone, but it's something to think about.
Okay, we're back. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us if you're just joining us. I wanted to introduce our 2 guests. We're so lucky to have Macy Miller from Moscow joining us. Macy became Idaho's own tiny house celebrity when her self-built tiny house on wheels became perhaps one of the most shared tiny houses on the internet. Built for just $11,416,000 in 2011, Macy has since moved from Boise to Moscow, and her tiny now fits her partner, 2 children, a Great Dane, and a cat. And she's joining us from another building that she built on her rural site. She'll probably explain that when she speaks. And then Eric Kingston is a professional community and economic developer focused on housing as a human right essential to community and economic stability. He spent 25 years learning from others and cultivating informed policy and support for universal access to housing, equity, and affordability. Thank you guys both for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yes. And do one of you guys want to start? And if
go for it, Macy. No, Macy, you go for it. You're farther north.
Does that count for something?
Sure.
Well, I just want to be clear. Eric's the professional here. I'm just somebody who built a house.
I'm just a guy.
But I'll tell you a little bit about my story. It's not so much about co-housing as much as another affordable housing type. And I was raised in Boise. And I got married, I graduated college, and I bought a big house, and I got in over my head. And then 2008 happened and everything was wiped out from underneath me. And just like the blink of an eye, it felt like. And so in the midst of all that, I kind of came up with an idea. I had this dream, and it sounds totally crazy. But I lived in a really small house, and I knew that people lived on houseboats, but I'm afraid of water. And so that was never the route for me. So I was like, well, I'll build like a little RV, but it's Boise and it gets cold. So it's got to have substantial, it's got to be built like a house. And so I designed it and I built it, and I literally broke my back doing it. It's hard work, but it works. And so my background is also in design. I work in architecture. And so I kind of took it on as an educational experience. I'm going to go ahead and do this thing. I'm going to put in a composting toilet. I'm going to put in radiant floor heat. I'm going to use it as an experiment. And my idea was to take 1 year's worth of rent payments, which back then was substantially less than it is now. I would build this house and I would live in it for 2 years. At that rate, it would pay me back and then some. And then at that point, I'll move it to the mountains or something. But I looked at it as a challenge, thinking it's going to be really hard to live in a 200 square foot house. And then I moved in, and it's not hard at all. It scratched every itch. I was free. Like my rent payments was $200 a month because I rented a parking spot. And it was nothing. It was manageable, And the problem with it is it wasn't legal. It was not illegal either, but it was not legal. So my entire efforts for the last nearly decade have been to normalize the tiny house movement so that it can become an outlet for people to further their life if that fits for them. Tiny houses obviously don't fit for everybody. I'm probably the least likely demographic now. I have 2 kids, a partner, a dog, and we live in 232 square feet. I expanded it when I had my kids. But it works. There's nothing wrong with it at all. And in the beginning, people would be like, well, it's a tiny house. And I had to explain what a tiny house was, which seems totally silly because it's just a small house. But now everybody knows what a tiny house is. And then it became, well, yeah, it's just a fad. They'll get over it. It's almost a decade that I've lived in 200 square feet. It's not that bad still. So everything has been about just normalizing it and being a good example and a good steward, and encouraging others along the path. I spend a lot of my time helping people work through code issues. My architectural background helps a lot with that. I'm familiar with codes. I'm familiar with working through jurisdictions. And a lot of what I do is coach people from around the country how to talk to their jurisdictions, because it's very daunting. And it's something that's reserved a lot for developers and architects. And quite frankly, sometimes city officials are not that friendly to the layman that comes in and asks questions. They'd rather talk to a professional who knows what they're doing. And so a lot of what I do is just helping people approach their jurisdiction. They work for you. When you live there, the job of a city official is to work for you. But it's important how you approach them, and that it's copacetic for everybody. In 2016, I was a part of a group of people who wrote a tiny house appendix into the International Residential Code. And I flew with my family to Kansas City to present in front of a group of, I'm going to go ahead and say confidently, old white men who make the codes and the rules for everybody to live. And we made our case and we presented. And miraculously, they passed it. So we adopted the tiny house appendix into the International Residential Code in 2016. At that point, I started getting it adopted into Boise City and at the state of Idaho at the state level. Idaho was the very first state in the nation to adopt the tiny house appendix. And then I decided that Boise outgrew us. And so I rolled on and we moved to Moscow, Idaho. But I'm still working with the city of Boise. I'm still working with the state of Idaho. And I'm still working on a national level, trying to normalize and legalize tiny houses on a wider scale. But that's it. And now I'm talking to you from my pantry, which is also my water storage. We currently live off grid, just outside of Moscow. It's fantastic. But there are some other examples I wanted to point out. Tiny houses are not co-housing, but there is plenty of examples of co-housings that use tiny houses in almost every state now, not Idaho. Idaho's had a few attempts at a good co-housing development, but nothing has stuck yet. But tiny houses are a vehicle, that's punny, towards co-housing if that's something you're interested in. I would like to see them implemented on a more widely used scale. The method that I push is tiny houses as alternative or ADUs.
Movable.
What's that?
Movable
tiny houses, but as ADUs in somebody's backyard. That way you can use the existing city's infrastructure to increase your density. And it works for everybody. And like I say, not everyone is going to do tiny houses, but there are a lot of people who would benefit from tiny homes. So I've been working at that for quite a few. Actually, the city of Boise just reached out to me last month over this. They're looking at tiny houses now. Cities move really slowly, so don't get too excited or anything, but they're actively looking at solutions to the housing crisis in Boise right now. And tiny house is one. But other than that, I have all kinds of answers for you if you have questions. I'm very reactive, I don't push my views on anybody, but I am very happy to answer any questions people might have.
Great. That's an awesome overview. And I think there'll be a lot of questions for you. I don't know if folks want to ask them now, or should we have Eric go?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, Eric, why don't you go and give us kind of like a bigger overview of other potential alternative housing solutions, and then we can just have a larger discussion about all of the whole kind of spectrum of them.
Okay, so it's been kind of a crazy week. So I pulled out a presentation from a couple of years back and just cut a bunch of stuff out of it and pasted a few more things into it, just to kind of go through some visual examples. And can everybody, let me just go ahead and share the screen here as soon as I get the official okie dokie.
I think I have to give you permission, right?
I think you do, yeah.
And I don't
I
remember
need special dispensation from Lori.
I don't remember how to do that.
Go down to the share screen at the bottom of your screen, and then pull up. Okay.
Multiple participants can share.
That's
okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Ruth. Hi, Roberta. So I just want to, before I start this, I want to just point out that Macy and I, we met right after you built your house.
That is correct. You invited me to talk about something I was extremely nervous to go talk about, but I didn't.
Actually, I think you and I were both invited by somebody else to.
Oh yeah, that was Mira and Christopher's movie.
Exactly. Yeah, it was at the Idaho American Planning Association of Idaho chapter conference quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And so we were on that panel, and we hadn't met before, but I was really kind of fascinated by what you were doing, and I'd been sort of pimping, Jay Schaefer's tumbleweed houses for a while, and at least, well, not pimping, that's probably a bad choice of words, but sharing the information with people, because I thought it was a great idea. And then we got to meet, and then I think we presented later on at some other events, and I've talked to people about your efforts for a while. And every once in a while, I would send Macy a screenshot of somebody who was using a picture of her house illegally.
Happens.
To market stuff that was unrelated. So anyway, yeah, we go way back, and I'm really excited to see how you and James and the kids have kind of made your home up there, and it's a beautiful spot you have.
Thank you. We love it.
So it's impressive. So I'll go ahead and share this. And can you guys all see that?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. So I left the people on there that I presented with. So we had Ben Schulman from Small Change Real Estate out of Pittsburgh. He works with Eve Picker, and Ben's no longer with Small Change, but I got to present with Eve Picker last year at the APA conference in Idaho. Anna McKay is now on her own. She's got a new cool gig called Sister City. And she used to be director of development for Guerrilla Development in Portland. Sarah Cunningham's a local Boise housing person. And so we got to present down in Denver a couple of years ago. And these were kind of the topics that we were talking about there, you know. And I took out a lot of the legacy challenge stuff because I think everybody that's on this video or on this Zoom, you guys know what the challenges are, you know. We don't have enough housing, and what we have is really expensive, and it's hard for anybody to get into it. And we have this kind of constant tension between, you know, sprawl and density, and nobody wants either. Everybody hates both of them, and but we have to have some balance to increase this housing stock somehow. So, you know, and basically my mantra is always, how do we preserve housing? How do we preserve the housing that we have and keep it out of the hands of spec investors and house flippers that take it out of the running for most people who work for a living, you know, work for a paycheck in Idaho, for instance. They're just priced out of the market because of all the spec investment and commodification. How do we finance stuff? You know, looking at the way we plan and develop residential, and then who informs those decisions. So let's see. There we go. I'm going to kind of breeze through a couple of these. I like to use this image because, and I try to use it whenever I can with policymakers to say, look, if you don't stop the hemorrhaging of your current existing housing stock, it's like trying to put water into a leaky bucket, you know, without patching the holes. Or it's like trying to, you know, pedal forward on your bike, you know, with your hands on the brakes. You just can't do it. It's very inefficient. So trying to get people to think more about, you know, the logic there. This is kind of a cool book. It's available online as a PDF for free. If you're interested in the history of residential hotels, this is the guy who wrote the book on the history of residential hotels, and it's fascinating. And I love this quote. But this kind of goes to show like a type of housing that used to be ubiquitous throughout the country. And it was that residential hotel that most cities had, where if you were new to town and you needed a place to stay that was cheap, you just needed a room and a bathroom, and there was a cafe downstairs, and you could, you know, access all this stuff in town. That was your option. And we just destroyed all of them pretty much. So now we're trying to recreate them. And I kind of see that the rise in interest for, I call them small footprint housing or small footprint residential, because tiny houses are kind of a trigger word for some policymakers. You know, Macy's probably never run into that, but I'm just kidding. And so, but we're seeing this sort of organic response to this vacuum that was created when we destroyed all the residential hotels. So we need that type of housing that's, you know, kind of scaled back a little bit for people who don't want a full, you know, like 1,100 square foot or 2,500 square foot house. So rethinking markets, I'm going to get rid of this and go through that. I do like to suggest that at least when I'm talking to real estate people, And I know a few people who have become realtors, mostly single moms trying to figure out how to make a living. And I try to impress upon them that, you know, realtors need to start thinking about the housing market like an ecosystem, just like these other industries do, you know, farming and fishing and forestry. You want to make sure that you're kind of caretaking the resource that you have, you know, to make it sustainable, so that you've got income in the long run, just, you know, not just like getting a whole bunch of money up front and then killing, you know, kind of killing the goose that laid the golden egg. So I just like to point out that that real estate industry needs healthy buyers with good credit on deck. Now, right now, they've got outside investors that can buy all the housing they can sell. So this is an odd time, but you need a diversity of housing stock so that people can move through that market. You know, people that buy a starter home might say, oh, I need to buy something bigger, or people that have something that's too big might want something smaller. And you have a little bit of movement. Right now, the market's locked up, and they need a community that is functional. And that means people who are essential workers, people at all income levels, people who are retired, students. They all need a place to live, and create stability for that community. And that makes the housing in that community more desirable. So local control is a huge thing. This is kind of hyper-local Boise stuff, but I've worked on a couple of projects locally. One of them is the Armory on Reserve Street that was transferred to outside ownership. A California land developer owns it now, and it's been sitting vacant for the last, well, since 2009 or so. Anyway, it's important to think about housing stock, but also your historic and heritage, and anything you can do to kind of retain that local ownership and local control over land and essential assets is really critical. Once it's in outside hands, you lose control of your destiny in that community. This is what the Roosevelt market used to look like before it changed hands, and it's kind of different now. So anyway, I'll kind of breeze through that. Inclusive planning and design. I put this in here. Macy, are you familiar with Michael Piatok? Piatok Architects. He's sort of a hero of mine. He's a guy that grew up in you know, a single parent household in New York and in the 60s, and he started out as a civil rights activist and was able to get a scholarship, and he went to school to become an architect, and he got a scholarship at Harvard. And his whole career has been focused on designing and building housing for people that were in the situation he was in when he was a kid. You know, very little money, urban setting. And so what he does is, from the very beginning of the design process, he's talking to people who are going to live in the you know, buildings that he designs. He's talking to the neighbors who live next door to the buildings he's designing, and he's engaging everybody in that design and planning process so that everybody feels like they're invested in it. And that's the way to make great housing. It's the way to make great cities and places, and it's the way to reduce NIMBYism, I think, ultimately, because people in the community feel valued, and they feel heard, and they see their own ideas, you know, kind of manifested in the final product. And I was invited to introduce him when he came and spoke to the U of I a few years ago, and got to go out and have dinner with them. And it was like I was totally geeking out. I was just like such a nerd, but a really cool guy. And he's now encouraging all of his architecture students to learn how to become developers, because he says that's where the control is. And I think all of you kind of understand that if you've been following the kind of developments in Boise and other cities. Developers are really calling the shots in a lot of cases. And so it's, you know, it's like you can't control what happens to a piece of land unless you have, you know, some sort of ownership over it, I think. And that's an unfortunate reality, but that's kind of how it works. And by the same token, he says this process of development, you need some people who are enlightened, socially enlightened and have some understanding of the role of housing in the larger context of community and economic stability. So speaking of Australia, I was searching for this while you were playing that clip because I thought it'd be a good segue, but there's a really cool group in Australia called Nightingale Architecture or Nightingale Planning, and they've created some super efficient multifamily housing and shared housing that I would really encourage folks to check out. So I think it's Nightingale Planning or Nightingale Housing in Australia, and the guy has a killer YouTube video that's worth watching. But they looked at every aspect of the design and construction process, and they stripped out everything that they could live without, and they were able to reduce the cost of their units by probably 30% from what it would normally cost. And it's a beautiful structure in a lot of ways. It really works well with the environment nearby, and doesn't take. They've been able to eliminate all the AC because they're taking advantage of environmental features there. So it's a cool project. But that's one of the other factors I think that people are looking at with housing. Excuse me. In terms of rethinking finance, typically, you've got fixed costs in building something. You've got the cost of the land, you've got the cost of labor and materials, and you've got the cost of financing or how you buy all this other stuff. And depending on that financing, if you're getting government financing, say tax credits or home dollars through HUD, that comes with a lot of strings attached. And the regulatory aspect of that federal funding can drive the price per unit well above $250,000 in a multifamily complex, just because the legal fees and the tax accountant costs are pretty exorbitant. So Small Change came up with this idea that was based on crowd investing. And so you can invest as little as $500 in any of these projects they have listed. And Small Change basically is sort of they're like a go-between to help democratize financing for housing and small businesses and placemaking in cities. And the woman who started it is Eve Picker, and I highly recommend checking out her blog. It's evepicker.com. And she interviews some of the most innovative kind of builders and developers and architects and finance folks that are really looking at every aspect of creating or recreating cities and preserving affordability. So there might be a bungalow court project that they're trying to restore an old historic bungalow court. You can invest in that. You see these other options that are listed here. These are just the ones off the front page or the home page today, so I just snagged those. And in this case, it's they've got a $1,000 minimum investment, but this is for people who are not accredited investors, meaning you're not rich. You can analyze the risk, and I haven't pulled the trigger on this, but I did buy shares in Boise Brewing a long time ago, so I'm happy about that. Guerrilla Development. This was I mentioned Anna McKay, delightful person, and this is a project called Unicorn Bed, and this is housing for single moms in Portland. And so I'm not sure how they get around the fair housing piece of that. I haven't really reached out to ask them, how they do that, but they've kind of been looking at different needs, and they created one called Jolene's First Cousin that was for people who are formerly homeless in Portland, and it was kind of like a single room occupancy model or a residential hotel model on a very small scale, just I think 10 units. And so people can rent one of those units for about $400 in downtown Portland. And that's a pretty affordable price in that city. So Unicorn Bed is really kind of looking at a different demographic. And, a lot of single moms are they're kind of helping each other out in this case. And it's a safe space for them to stay. So there were some talk earlier, kind of people mentioned co-ops, co-housing, collectives. There's kind of a nifty matrix that I snagged from a woman involved in the Queen City Cooperative in Denver. And I'll be happy to post links to their information as well. So I can, if Lori, if you can kind of bug me after this, let me know about the Queen City Cooperative link, and I'll make sure I get that to you so you can share it. But this kind of shows like how some of these different things function. And so I'll let people kind of look at that offline. Rethinking Shelter. I was part of a group that went out to research housing first models on the West Coast a few years ago, back in 2015, 2016. And one of the places we visited was Eugene, and a project called Community Supported Shelters of Eugene. And they're the ones that have kind of started formalizing the design of these things they call Conestoga huts. And these are very inexpensive to produce. They have volunteers from the local community that come in and help build them. They have a fabrication shop on site where they can fabricate some of the components, and then everything is assembled by volunteers. So it might be high school students or the local VFW or some other group that comes in and helps them build these. And then they make these available to people as an alternative to tent camping. And they basically organize and approach the city and public, kind of different public entities, and they're able to use fenced and gated parcels of land that are unused. So it might be a utility company or the city or Parks and Rec or whatever. And so they basically have these secure sites, and they're able to stay off the ground and out of the weather, and have a locking door so they can keep their stuff safe when they go into town and engage with community services or go to work or whatever. And it's a really cool community. I got to hang out and spend an afternoon with the folks that lived in one of these communities in Eugene. And they were just really super proud of it was a neighborhood for them. I mean, that was their space, and they'd kind of created it, the way they wanted to, and they were able to host, other folks from different safe spots in the community. It was really cool to get to know them. And then the other place we looked at, I don't have a picture of it here, but it was called Opportunity Village, and we got to meet some of the folks there. And that is kind of a step up from the community safe spot for the community shelter. And in that case, they look like storage sheds, but they're not. They're using kind of standard dimensional lumber, tough sheds and stuff. Those are like 2x3 or, that kind of construction. And they were using 2x4s and 2x6s for theirs. And so they were creating insulated, lockable, spaces that were large enough for 1 to 2 people to sleep in, keep their stuff in. And they had no power or plumbing, but they had shared facilities for that. And in Opportunity Village, they were able to they created 30 structures, and all the shared, like the bathhouse and the kitchen and a community space. And it cost them less than $100,000. And they were housing people for about $3 a night in Eugene, which is a phenomenal achievement, I think. And the people there were just really happy to be where they were. So this is a picture I took a couple years ago. I went back to follow up and visit Andrew, the project manager, and this is called Emerald Village. But you can see more about all of these at squareonevillages.org. They basically have now a model that they can franchise, where they can help other groups in different communities to replicate what they've done, and they will actually extend like an umbrella policy from their insurance coverage, and then basically walk you through all the steps in terms of permitting and kind of residential agreements and in agreements with the city and that kind of thing. So really interesting group of people. Different cooperatives. This is in Zurich, Switzerland. It's my wife and daughter standing on the corner there. And we have some friends that have lived in this building here on the end, the kind of lighter colored building. And they went in on that with several other couples. So every couple has their own level in this building. And it's a housing cooperative. And in Switzerland, housing cooperatives have been written into their constitution since, I think, 1912 or 1910. So the government makes guaranteed loans or direct loans to groups that want to create a housing cooperative. And it's a very low interest loan. It's for acquisition, rehab, things like that. And there are a lot of older buildings that are suited for that, that still are in good shape in Europe. So it's a great spot. And they have this little shared garden out back. These are the folks that live in the in the building. And so they share a lot of different things, and they share meals a lot, but they each have their own space. So this is also in Zurich. This is a much larger housing cooperative. This one, I think, is a 96 unit cooperative, and this was new construction. They found a piece of ground that was kind of oddly shaped, and it was built over the top of a train line. You can kind of see down in the bottom there, the train kind of moving through the tunnel under the street. And so this has a movie theater, it has retail, has a central courtyard, and the rooms are set up so that they're kind of like a hotel room where they have adjoining doors or communicating doors between certain units. So if there's a larger family, they can rent or buy 2 units next to each other and have more space. So it's kind of a flexible plan. And then every so often they have what they call joker units that are essentially a short-term guest unit for families and friends that come to visit people that live there. It's a pretty fascinating project, so you can check them out. The other thing I kind of took back from there, we actually stayed in one of these places in Haarlem in the Netherlands. And so this is just an example of row housing that is just ubiquitous throughout Europe and a lot of other countries. And I put it up there because I think, it's an example of kind of scalable density that is pretty livable and makes pretty efficient use of the land. Everybody has their own backyard, their own patio, place to barbecue. They have a little garage or shed out back, and alley access. So, but we found them, to be quite comfortable, and you do have a shared wall, so there's a little bit of noise, but you just have to keep your fingers crossed that you have good neighbors, and that's it. So I'm gonna shut that off and show you one other thing that is just a project I got involved with several years ago in Boise, and this drew from elements of the Eugene Safe Spots and the Opportunity Village model. And what we did is, I had a friend that was a professor of architecture for U of I, and she came to me and said, I need a short-term project for my students that's like a discrete kind of project that's not going to be too involved. So I arranged for this architecture students to go down to Cooper Court and interview some of the people who lived in the tent city next to Interfaith Sanctuary. This was a while ago. It's been cleaned out since then, but so they got to interview these folks living in tents as if they were clients and say, here's what we can do, what's important to you in a structure, how, as far as square footage, as far as features and things like that. And then we gave them some pretty strict cost requirements. And you can see the materials costs for some of these. And again, this was back in 2016. But it was kind of cool because the students got to put together a nice project. They got to learn a little bit about, the homeless population in Boise and put faces to names, or, put faces to the folks they were hearing about in the news and get to know a little bit about them. And then they were able to present their finished product to an audience that included not only professors and other students, but people from the community, and the folks from Cooper Court came to see the finished product. So that was kind of cool. And then some of us actually built one of them. And I'm not sure what it stores now, but there was a person living in it for a while. I think it's just a storage unit now. That's the official word. So anyway, I'll stop sharing and I'll shut up now.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was really great. I appreciated the slideshow, the visual accompaniment to it. And then I was going to ask you a question. How many of all those ideas that you shared with us exist in Boise?
You know, Sage School built 2 Conestoga huts. I kind of introduced Guy Falconer, who was one of the teachers there at the time, to Eric DeBoer in Eugene, and Eric shared the set of plans that they had for Conestoga huts with Guy, and so he had some of his students build 2 of these Conestoga huts, and they kind of put their own twist on it, made their own mark with it. Those are kind of behind Interfaith Sanctuary right now, as well as this unit that we built that based on the U of I architecture students design. I don't know about other stuff. I don't know about housing cooperatives. I know that there are some folks that have sort of, indicated that the residential hotel thing might be a good option for a couple of different spaces. But I don't know. Do you know of any housing cooperatives or anything like that?
I don't. I do know maybe like kind of unofficially people who have unrelated people who have gone in together to buy a house. I know one situation like that.
Yeah.
And they had to draw up a contract, et cetera, to determine who's paying for what, et cetera. But other than that, no. And I think this is why we're talking about this. This is obviously what's missing from Boise is that you have like Wall Street investor-owned apartments on one end, and you have $450,000 mortgages on the other, and we just don't have much in between. There used to be starter homes. There used to be affordable homes, but now, townhouses, et cetera. But, I recently saw a townhouse in Harris Ranch that was priced at $600,000. There used to be condominiums, but, nobody's building condominiums for less than $600,000 now. So there just is kind of nothing in the middle. And so this is the point where I think people have to just sort of take the reins and, figure it out the way for themselves, because obviously the market isn't producing the housing that's accessible and affordable for people who are living on Idaho salaries.
Yeah, and you mentioned the housing cooperative where people bought or went in on a house and shared that. I mean, that's the Queen City cooperative model. Mm-hmm. So Denver is much like Boise, everything's out of reach. And so there were 5, I think, kind of youngish professionals, and they realized there was just nothing within reach for them. And so they pooled their resources and they ended up buying a large house, large 2-story, house with multiple bedrooms. And then it had a sort of a semi-finished basement with a separate entrance. And they finished that and turned it into an Airbnb. And that basically covers most of their carrying costs for the mortgage. Mm-hmm. And so each of those folks are able to build some equity because they all have a stake in the mortgage, and their names are on the line, and they have a contract in place, right of first refusal if somebody decides to leave. Everybody gets a chance to select another shareholder, and because they have to share the space.
Right.
And but yeah, I was really impressed with their presentation.
Well, and this might be a good time to open it up and see if maybe Ruth wants to talk about what her experience has been. I know there's something called the Boise Eco Village project that's been, I think, around for maybe a decade or so by now. I'm not exactly sure when it started. So there has been this group of people meeting and trying to find a way to have a co-housing structure complex somewhere in Boise. And I think they have been unsuccessful to date. So I don't know if Ruth wants to talk about it, even if you don't have a lot of experience with that, maybe what your vision is of such a situation.
Well, I'm fairly new in town. I come from the epicenter of co-housing, where the developers who have put up 140 across North America live. They're very good friends of mine. I've been involved in some co-housing projects and came to Boise knowing that there's been a number of projects here that have not lifted off, and said, I want to live in co-housing. And in co-housing as a model means, based on the Danish model, that there is a common house and there are shared facilities. There's no duplication of facility other than, you do have your own, bathroom, kitchen, and sleeping areas, but all those shared spaces that don't get used, guest rooms and garages and shared outside spaces, and then the common house would hold all of that. We're well aware. I just started meeting with people a few months ago, so we're all over the place right now. There's nothing formed at all. We're just getting kind of formed. If anybody wants to be involved in coming together as community to find a place to live together, co-housing traditionally should be about 20 to 30 family units, multi-generational. Inner city. It's got to be inner, walkable, infill neighborhood. I'm coming up against everything that you guys are talking about. The cost of construction is going up at 10% a year right now. The cost of land is skyrocketing in Boise. I'm comparing it to projects that are just being finished in comparable communities like Bozeman and Spokane. They're running at the same dollar amount, and there is nobody who can build these units cheaper than about $400,000 a piece. And this is no profit margin. This is people managing their own development. I'm seeing the same thing happening in Boise, and I'm thinking, gee, I'm priced out, right? I don't have the wherewithal, and I do not have the time to pay a $400,000 mortgage. And the group may decide to go with a more traditional co-housing new build. But I know that I'm probably going to end up peeling off. I've been looking at some unique pieces of property that are in Boise that are sitting on the market right now with basically old and destroyed buildings on them, that maybe there's a renovation for a common house and then a tiny home, or some of these other models that Eric was showing, perfect examples of how to build space of different sizes for different types of families who want to live around an open space together as a community, have common facilities, lessen our footprint, and live in community. So one way or another, we have not solved this yet. We are really early stages. And like I said, I'm totally aware that there's been 2, 3, 4 different attempts to do this in Boise. I just want to do it too. So we'll see what happens. It might be 2 or 3 different types of ideas that end up being birthed. But if anybody wants to be a part of it, we have a meetup group where you can join called Boise Co-Housing. Easy peasy. Just go join us on Meetup. And as we have meetings, we're kind of burning out on Zoom. I think there are going to be some live meetings coming up before too long. And then we'll really get to know each other better and make some decisions about how to move forward.
Great. Thank you so much for filling us in on that. I really appreciate that. Now we're just going to open it up. If people have specific questions for the guests, feel free to raise your hand, either virtually or, let's see, I guess we can do it this way. How's that? That way I can see if folks have questions. Amy.
I always have questions.
Good.
This is kind of open for everybody. What kind of, I guess, opportunities or progress is out there of obtaining like grants or government aid to doing these like co-housing units or residential hotels or any of this? Like, do you guys have experience in trying to obtain that? Like, has it worked? Does it not work? Like, is there room for progress there? That's it. None at all.
Eric probably in the best position to answer that since he works full-time in housing.
Yeah, I'm out of some of the loops though, just to be honest. I don't get too involved in that side of it. I do know that with the funding coming from the feds right now, there may be some opportunities through different channels, to create some additional housing. There's emergency services grants or emergency solutions grants. I think that's what they're calling it now, the ESG funding, and the state should be getting quite a chunk of that. But that's really focused on like homelessness prevention. I don't know how much of it can be used as, long-term, kind of ultra low-cost housing, like an Opportunity Village or an Emerald Village kind of model. But I think it'd be worth talking with the city. I think the city of Boise is probably going to be your best bet to find out, if they're open to entertaining some innovative projects, kind of proof of concept projects, if folks can put something together. And I think it would be interesting to try to find a funding stream, that's kind of like that Swiss housing cooperative model where, you arrange for a source of, low cost financing in order to do acquisition rehab. Ruth was mentioning, some properties that are on offer that might be sort of rough around the edges. And I think that, if you can find those and snag them, that'd be great. My hunch is you're going to see some underutilized commercial property, now that kind of COVID has shown a lot of businesses that, they don't need as much of a footprint as they used to. So there may be some buildings that get vacated as business interests sort of maybe, merge together and free up space. I think that might be an opportunity. So, and the advantage to commercial zoning is that you can do like a residential hotel or boarding house, rooming house model in C1 and C3, I think, zones. And there's one that's called an R1A zone that allows for that as well. So it's worth looking at the zoning, the code, and finding out like what's allowed in each of those zones, because that gives you some ideas of where to kind of put your search, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
And yeah, absolutely.
And that reminds me that right now the city is undergoing overhauling their zoning code so that, that the rules that govern what can be built where, et cetera. And so it's actually a really good opportunity right now in Boise to get some changes like making tiny houses movable ADUs or accessory dwelling units so that somebody could put one in their backyard and that it would be legal because we will create this category called a movable ADU, which doesn't currently exist in the law. So there's other things as well. There's, these shifts that we can make in the sort of the legal framework that exists right now, just given that everything is on the table as far as what the code says right now. And so it's an opportunity we haven't had before or in a very long time anyways. Did you have thoughts about that, Macy?
No, like I think it's really interesting that Boise reached out to me once I moved away. I was really passionate and really involved when I was there, and we moved away a year and a half ago. And really, we left even before that, is we kind of got evicted nicely. But it's something I've been trying to work on for nearly a decade. And then it's funny because I finally was like, okay, whatever, we're going somewhere else. And we got legal status here in a matter of weeks. Like, they were on it. They contacted us. They gave me an avenue. I'm totally legal now. I'm paying taxes now as a dwelling, not as this weird situation. And then Boise reached out to me to talk about how they could legalize tiny houses. I think they're on the right path. I love that they reached out to me because I have a lot of ideas on how they could and how they should. I think the short-term rental market could get in the way, and I think it's really important that they make some rules and regulations about how tiny houses can be used for short-term rentals, because once they get in that niche, they're not going to be affordable housing. People are going to profit from them more than they're going to house people. And so I'm trying to be very clear about those sorts of things. But I don't know, my steam has been let go from Boise a lot of ways, and I feel bad about that because it's my hometown, you know. But I'm glad that they're looking that way. They're one of the first big cities to be looking at how to adopt tiny houses as ADUs throughout the urban fabric. I think that's good news.
And Macy, are they looking at them on foundations, or are they looking at them as
movable
on a movable? Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's all I talk about. So if they want to stop at foundation, then I can stop at foundation, because that's not what needs to happen.
Obviously, what's changed is that we have a different mayor, and we also are in an unprecedented housing crisis. And so I think the city's looking at more things. And for folks who don't know, you know, when the mayor came into office, she convened these transitional committees, I think they were called. And one of the ideas that came out of the Committee on Housing was movable tiny houses as ADUs. And the idea it was that they were like a temporary situation, like, you know, if there happened to be an empty lot sort of before it got developed. So I mean, it's great that they're embracing them at all. I personally would appreciate it if it were more kind of thought of as just not like an interim thing, but sort of a long-term living option for folks. But yeah.
I see a question from Roberta to you and I, Macy, and I'll let you answer this. And it's, you know, how do you find the community reception to these options, you know, like the tiny house option?
You know, I ask, it's the same thing you mentioned. It's developing, it's that architect you mentioned who talks to the neighbors. You know, before I moved my tiny house downtown, I knocked on the doors and am I going to have a problem? And that was more so that I could sleep at night. You know, the city might give me trouble, but I don't want it coming from the neighbors. And also they live there. They get to decide, you know, and if it's okay with them, you're likely to be okay. Same thing we're doing up here. I have some wonky ideas for our property up here. I'm building several different tiny houses with natural building processes, rammed earth and whatnot. I'm talking to my neighbors who've never heard of these things before, but I want them to be in the loop because it's their little area too. And I don't want to make it uncomfortable for them. So I think that's how you get everyone on board. And I have talked to people in Boise, and the consensus in Boise on tiny houses has changed radically in the last 10 years. It was not well received. And now everybody thinks they're so cute and they'd be perfect for their kids, or they'd be perfect for XYZ. It's never them. It would never be perfect for them, but they have ideas of other people it would be perfect for, you know? So it's a radically different atmosphere right now. And I think that goes a long way with jurisdictions as well.
And I think there's some value. I mean, I guess, you know, when I started working on housing issues back in the mid 90s, I really sensed that there was a poor understanding of the role of housing, you know, how housing, you know, sort of informs all these other things in community and the economy. And so I thought, well, if I can just like get people talking about this in a realistic way, you know, maybe they'll change their ideas and maybe have some informed policy decisions. So after Macy and I met each other at the planning conference, I thought, well, I'll just make sure that this is an issue that gets talked about at the American Planning Association every year. And so I would always have, a presentation either that was overtly called, small footprint housing, or had some slides that featured that. And then I would invite planners to come and talk about how their community was looking at this issue around the state, whether it was Coeur d'Alene or other places. And I think that my suggestion would be, if you can adopt that approach and find out like who the people are that are making some of these decisions behind the scenes and that have some kind of influence, even though it might not be like a done deal, they can at least be at the table when some of these things are discussed. And I think, hopefully you're seeing the results of, like Macy's work, with the International Residential Code and, kind of making some changes at that level, and with the, Idaho Department of Building Safety, that initiative, so I think all of those little things start to add up, and people start to say, oh, this might not be so crazy after all. And then of course there's a sort of popular, version of tiny houses that people see on, like cable TV or, whatever YouTube channels, and that's where a lot of community members, get introduced to it. And there's so many people making some just beautiful tiny spaces. I think it's pretty, there's quite an allure there, I think. And I don't know if you guys know this. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, my mantra is to be loud, proud, and happy. Like everybody has an idea of this person that lives in a tiny house, and it doesn't look like me usually. And so I try to tell everybody like, yeah, no, it's not that bad. Also, I'm normal. I have kids. I'm like you. I do the same things you do. And then it becomes okay.
Yep, absolutely. And, making people understand that this is great for students, it's great for starter homes, it's great for seniors who want to, kind of reduce their footprint.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm the least likely demographic, and it's okay.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I did a presentation just recently for the Rocky Mountain Land Use Institute with Kurt Hibbert from Blackfoot, Idaho. And I'll show you a slide, there's a couple slides that he had for this. But Blackfoot just passed the first tiny house ordinance in Idaho. And they're not tiny homes on wheels, they're on a foundation. But basically they were seeing some huge shifts in their housing market. Lots of people flocking there with RVs, parking in places that didn't have hookups. They had just major problems. They have nothing for rent right now. When we did this presentation, we checked the rental market in Blackfoot, and there was 0 rentals, and there was 1 house available for sale, and it was just falling apart. So they've been getting flooded with people from out of state who want to come and retire in sleepy little Blackfoot, Idaho, which is not going to be so sleepy now. But this is kind of their looking at their zoning ordinance. They wanted to do an audit to see what's working for us right now. And I think that's the suggestion for a lot of communities is take a hard look at your zoning and your codes to see if they're actually functioning the way you want them to. They're actually serving the community, given the changes you've had in your housing market. So that's kind of what they looked at. And so I can put this link in the chat so you can actually look at their whole code. This is actually a house that Kurt designed and built years ago for his dog Raleigh, and Raleigh's a big hound dog, and he has never spent one night in that house. So now it's just an accessory in his lawn, I think. But yeah, they really they looked at a lot of different things, and I'm really impressed by here's little Blackfoot, Idaho, and rural Idaho, and they've been really thoughtful about how do we come up with a humane response to the growing homelessness population that we're seeing in our community. What can we do to make sure people have a place to live? And so if it can happen in Blackfoot, Idaho, I think they're a good. It's like you Macy, you say I'm the maybe they don't think of somebody like me when they think of tiny houses, but they might not think of someplace like Blackfoot either. You know, I mean, it's a good model, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Other questions that folks have? Oh, there's a question in the chat from Barbara. It says, Macy, you spoke of using a tiny house as an accessory dwelling and using the city infrastructure. Is it less expensive to hook up to sewer, water, and power than your average dwelling?
There's no model on how to do it yet. That's what I propose. A lot of tiny houses now use off-grid sort of systems where you drain gray water into French drain and you use a composting toilet and you have solar, or you can hook up. That's not going to fly in an urban area. It will have to tie into the city grid somehow. My proposal, that's always part of the host house, but we have the ADU allowances right now. You can build an accessory dwelling unit in your backyard. It still has to hook up to all the city services and everything. So this would be building an ADU pad where you don't have to build the house, but you still have to provide the infrastructure. And then you hook up like an RV and you can tie into all the same systems at that point. But that's the only way they're going to be adopted at a wide scale in an urban center. The dense population doesn't allow for your off-grid utilities anymore. It's not a health, or it's a health safety hazard. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so, unless Barbara has more to add. One thing I remember reading something. So Portland is very welcoming to tiny houses right now. They
right now,
yeah,
they do this thing with them.
Yeah, but I think that I think a few years ago they declared like a housing emergency, and so they just stopped enforcement, and so they've really proliferated there. And from what I remember, I'm not 100% sure this is Portland. Sometimes I'm like conflating other cities, but I feel like they legalized them as, maybe it was LA, but they legalized them as movable ADUs, and they had just sort of some sort of like lower flat fee to hook up to utilities for the city. I don't know if I'm making this number up, but I thought it was like $2,500, but that seems high to me now, so I'm not sure. But something that's not like equivalent to you're running, you know, pipes underground, because it's more like an RV where this stuff is just sort of above ground and you're just plugging in a plug like a regular utility plug into, you know, a 3-prong outlet. You're not, you know.
Well, most places like plumbing is determined by what fixtures you have. And so they may choose to set a baseline for what tiny houses have: 1 bathroom with a kitchen, a shower, and a toilet. Or they may up that even. Or there's any number of methods they can choose to adopt them at.
Right. We can get innovative.
Yeah.
And tailor it to the situation and not just have a blanket thing for all structures. Other questions that folks have? We said we'd go till 9, so it's 9:01 right now. So we'll just do kind of another round of if anyone has any last minute questions.
Oh, I'm unmuted. I just wanted to throw a comment out there. That offer of being an intern type thing, I just want to throw that out to anyone. I'm someone I'm really just trying to learn and get more involved. And I learn by doing and being around people who know what they're doing. I don't have a lot of like free time, but if anybody who's on this call right now, if you guys have any like small, like low commitment type tasks that you can offer some guidance, if you ever want to like shoot me a message, I would love to take it on, simply because it would benefit me, and hopefully it would benefit you too. So I just want to throw that out there as something.
Are you interested in learning how to paint a house?
Sure.
I'm kidding. It's a garage. It's not a house.
Tiny house.
A tiny.
Well, it's actually, and that's one of the projects I want to talk to Macy about, is converting my detached bedroom out back into a tiny, like little ADU.
Well, if you want my help to paint that house and you want to talk to me more about like what you're doing in the process, yeah, that'd be something I'd be willing to sign up for. So.
All right. You
Right
guys heard it here.
Here. I'm gonna put my email address out there. Don't feel obligated. Again, low commitment. I just started a new full-time job, and so.
Great.
It's a lot like whitewashing a fence. If you've ever read any Tom Sawyer.
Right. So there was one more question. Someone asked, is it difficult to move a tiny house?
It depends on how you build it. We've actually built 2 tiny houses. One was meant to travel and one was not meant to travel. I've moved both of them. Super easy on the one that was meant to travel. Super difficult on the one that was not meant to travel, but we made it. We were down to 5 tires by the time we pulled up, but we made it.
Is that the one you're living in now?
Yes.
Okay.
And it will never move again. I bought the property. Its final resting place is here. So it allowed me to become a homeowner before being a landowner.
I assume that you've taken the tires off of it then?
Yeah, we've actually taken the axles off because we wanted it to be a little lower. We didn't have to. Some places, as they legalize them, require you take the axles off. Ours did not require that, but we did it so that we could lower the house a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we actually had to move the little personal shelter that we built. And if you've got something that's a really small footprint, like a super small kind of thing like we had that might be, 8 by 12, 8 by 14, something like that. There are people that advertise themselves as shed movers.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a slick process, but it'll cost you a few $100 depending on how far you have to move it. It's mostly just across town or something like that. So we had to move that, and it was fascinating to see how they did it.
Yeah, I think that's like if you have a building that's like on skids that doesn't have wheels, and I think they have like a lift where they can pull it up and pull it onto a truck. I haven't seen it happen in action, but I've seen videos of it. So.
And I guess one of the questions I've got for you, Macy, I got 2 questions. One, if you got time. One is, are there any building materials or building strategies that you've seen recently that you're really interested in or you think are worth exploring? And 2, I'm always interested in accessibility, or a visitable home that somebody that uses a wheelchair or a walker has easy access to. You can invite them in for a beer and they can get into the bathroom and get out safely, and that's the other part of a tiny house that is always challenging, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple builders out there who do build ADU compliant tiny houses. One of them is Jesse Collingsworth, who is in Emmett, Idaho. He's one of the best tiny house builders in my opinion.
Nice.
He was the first one that was certified to build RVIA certified tiny houses. He made that path for other people. Tumbleweed was second, but little Idaho boy made it there first. And he does specialize in low VOC houses and ADA accessible houses. And he's got some really cool examples where, the bed is on rollers that it rolls up, and then at bedtime it comes down into the living room space, so there's no ramp. And he has one that has a cool fold down porch that has a ramp that comes down, but it still folds up and it's movable. But there's some really great examples for that. My house is not ADA compliant. The bathroom would be beyond a challenge, so would just the walkway. But I built it without thinking about any of those stuff. There's definitely strategies you can use to incorporate that though. Building materials, like for a tiny house or in general?
Or building techniques, like you've got SIPs, you've got super adobe. Well, I don't know, super adobe works for a tiny house unless it's on a foundation because you can't move that.
Yeah. There's, I'm really the whole reason I got into architecture to begin with was natural building processes. I love rammed earth. I love straw bale buildings. I love adobe. I love cob. None of those work for tiny houses. Tiny houses are just the same as any old house. They're stick frame. They can be advanced frame. They could be standard frame. They could be SIPs. They could be metal frame. It's just the same exact method of building as any other, cookie cutter house that you have. It's just small. The things that I'm really interested as a human being have more to do with the natural, go back ancient building techniques. But unfortunately, they don't blend with movable. So that's not,
Yeah.
you know, the tiny house is a tool to achieve a lifestyle. And for me, it gave me the financial freedom to pursue what I want to do. And that's its goal. And I think it's worked pretty well for me. I think it can also get a lot of other people towards their goals that are probably much different than mine, but that's the end goal, self-actualizing as a person. If you have affordable housing, you can self-actualize. You can do what you're meant to do on this planet.
Amen.
Yes, yes. Thank you for making that point. A lot of people are rent burdened or mortgage burdened, and then
house poor.
kind of, and locked into, you know, working 40, 50 hours a week with,
I've been there and it's not fun.
Without the time to pursue your interests. And so this, you know, this frees up a lot of mental and
Think of
time.
all the potential out there in the world that we're missing out on because people are so busy paying developers to build shitty houses.
Amen. Yes, that's a perfect point to end this on. So thank you guys so much for all the inspiration. I really appreciate you guys coming and joining us tonight. And it was very last minute invitation for both of you. So I especially appreciate you for that reason. And everyone else who joined us in the conversation tonight. We do this every Thursday night at 7:30 through March is what I've promised. I don't know if we'll extend it. But we've had some really great topics in the past, and you can go back to the Vanishing Boise Facebook page, look at the videos tab, and they're there. There's one about creative class, financialization of housing. We did one on short-term rentals last week, which was really great. And we did one on eviction and displacement. So those are the categories, the topics that we've done in the past. And we will be doing more. And I have like a special event that I'm going to announce. I guess tonight we're going to have an event in April 22nd. We were so lucky to book this guy named Patrick Condon. And he is a professor at the University of Vancouver, I think in Vancouver, BC. And he's an urban planning professor, and he has been a huge advocate of density. But he has changed his tune recently, given Vancouver and the situation in Vancouver and housing and a lot of international money coming in there. And so he now insists, you know, he thinks that cities need to insist on affordability, and not just that by simply building more, that anything will be more affordable. So it's all about the land speculation that happens and land inflation. So we're so lucky to have him on April 22nd. So make sure you join us for that, but we'll be back here next Thursday as well with another stimulating topic that has not been decided on yet. So thanks again, everybody. And
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for everybody for being here. Good night.
Y'all have a good night.